It's Marina with the Strip View Live Success Talk Show reporting out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And with me is Eric Edmeades. He is an expert in entrepreneurship and wealth psychology. That's very interesting. Well, tell us more about that.
Well, psychology is an interesting thing. A lot of people think that whether they can make money or not has a lot to do with, how they were brought up or what family they were born into or what they do for a living, when really wealth psychology has a lot more to do with what's going on inside their head.
Okay, so go ahead and start briefing me. So is this things like thoughts about what our parents told us or, programming?
Sure.
What,
what your parents taught you, what you've gleaned from the government, what you watched on TV. Here's an example. The vast majority of the population is not wealthy, right? The vast majority of the population is less than super wealthy. And so when Hollywood, for example, makes a movie, they make that movie for the for the larger segment of the population. They don't make the movie for the wealthy. So what they do is in those movies, they use values that will appeal to people who don't really have a lot of money. And so, for example, you'll see in the movies, it's always the bad guy that has a lot of money. As a matter of fact, all the superheroes are broke. Superheroes don't have a lot of money. The one superhero that has a lot of money is Batman. He's not entirely a good guy. So the way they condition us is that you never take the reward and that, that money is evil and all this sort of stuff. So people have a lot of issues around money that many times they're not even aware of. And so at any level of wealth, there are different things that might block people in terms of attracting more wealth into their lives.
So how do they go about unblocking those things?
Well, a big part of it is to understand what the blockages are that they have. And when they understand that, for example, someone might have a lot of guilt attached to money. When you see the generation of people who grew up following the Depression and the generation of people who will grow up following what we're going through right now, the things they learn from their parents about scarcity and about, don't spend and so on, the things they learn in that area might teach them to associate guilt with money. And so when they begin to understand that, they can overcome it, and they can begin to realize that if they have a great deal of money, it's not necessarily, it definitely doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, that with more money, they simply are more of what they already are. So if they're already loving and generous, then them having more money just creates more love and generosity. But, I guess it's a matter of identifying where those beliefs come from for them, and then learning to overcome them and learning to realize the opposite of it.
But don't you think that's probably one of the most challenging parts? It's kind of like if you know that there's a blockade in the road, you know exactly what that blockade is, and you're going to get out and you're going to move that obstacle. But when you don't know, and you're driving and you keep hitting something and you're not sure what it is, it's hard to figure out how do you remove that. So how does one really identify that they have blocks? I mean, obviously, if they're not having financial wealth in their life, that's pretty obvious. But how do they identify the actual blocks to start making that process of removing them?
Well, there's a number of ways. The one is that you go out and find a financial coach or somebody who is an expert in that area. But we have been coaching people on that kind of stuff for a long time. And one day, my girlfriend said to me, you really can't be doing this one-on-one for people or even for 100 or 500 people in an audience at a time. And so she suggested that I combine my previous experience, because before I got involved in speaking and writing and stuff, I was a business person. I started an IT company and sold it and retired and what have you. And she said, why don't you take that knowledge and combine it with this technology, this idea. And so we created a software package that people can do on the internet, a test essentially, that they go on the internet and do. They answer a bunch of questions about money, their beliefs about wealth or money and rich people and all this kind of stuff. And then the report, the test generates a report that comes back to them and tells them what blockages they have, and then also gives them specific steps they can take to overcome those blockages.
So is it different for each person? Is like a unique
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. What happens is that each person, there are 5 key emotional areas that hold people back financially. And so if I were to do the test, I'm going to get a completely different response from you. And what's really interesting is that this works equally well for people who are really, really not wealthy and people who are wealthy but just can't seem to break through to the next level. One of our original test clients before we launched the test properly was a very successful property investor and a wannabe author. And he just wasn't making it happen and had hit a plateau. So he'd done quite well, but he'd gotten as far as he was really going to get, and he couldn't figure out why. He did the test, and in that test he realized there was just one little belief that was blocking him. 6 months later he had his book published and he'd broken through the barrier. So even if people are really wealthy, they will have little things that might hold them back from that next level.
Well, that's amazing. So what website or information?
fqtest.org.
Say one more time.
fqtest.org.
And people can get all the testing and they get a printout. It's phenomenal. Well, what words of inspiration and encouragement do you have people out there who want to change their wealth psychology and who want money in their lives?
Well, there's a couple of things I want to suggest. The first thing is, have you heard of rich chocolate?
Rich chocolate?
Yeah. I mean, you've heard somebody say this chocolate is rich. Does the chocolate have any money? You see, being rich isn't really about having money. Being rich is about the way you live. And that's really one of the key principles to wealth, is that where you choose to live, how you choose to live, those are much more important to the level of wealth or richness you have in your life. The other thing is that the personal security that we're often chasing with money, I guess what I want to get at is that, especially when you're dealing with the kind of times you're dealing with right now, security is no longer in job security. Security is in having an entrepreneurial or an intrapreneurial spirit. So I think everybody's an entrepreneur, whether they're a business owner or not, because even if somebody's an employee, ultimately they have a business. Their business is to sell time to their boss. And in times like this, they have to be better at selling their time than anybody else is. So they have to make their time higher quality value, and they have to deliver better, and so on. So I think right now the thing is to take a look and say, hey, how am I responsible for my personal economic situation? And not blame the government and not blame the circumstances, and just get on with it. You have to realize that there's a macro economy, the larger economy that you participate in, and then there's your own personal economy. The only one you're really responsible for is your own. And if we all took responsible for our own economies, like for example, not buying everything on credit all the time, then the country wouldn't be in the shape that it's in.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom with us today. Phenomenal interview, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.